My name is Justin, and I am an addict, and I've been actively working the steps in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013, and I'm grateful to be sober one day at a time, thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts. Welcome to the 100th RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting. Woohoo! What an awesome thing to be a part of, and I'm so happy and grateful that this little meeting is continuing on in the forward trudge on this happy road of destiny. RICO 12 has been listened to over 45,000 times in 98 countries around the world. I think that's amazing and just blows my mind. Grateful for your part in that. RICO 12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addictions of all kinds and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcoholism, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, just to name a few. Each Friday at noon Central Time, we hold a live lunch hour speaker meeting with a recovering addict from anywhere on earth, pertaining to any or no faith tradition, and with any background who shares their experience, strength, and hope on a specified recovery topic of their choice. For the 12-week period going on through May 20th of this year, we are focusing on each of the 12 steps of recovery. Our speaker today, David A., will share for 20 to 25 minutes on his experience with step 10, and then the live audience gets the opportunity to ask questions of him for another 20 to 25 minutes. To get weekly invitations to join us, please go to RICO12.com, that's RECO12.com, and submit your email address there to get the reminders and links. Donations and podcast ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated, and details on doing that will be in the chat of the live meeting and also in the show notes of the podcast. If you're listening and feel that RICO 12 is of value to you, please take a minute and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's a great way to help us get the message out to more addicts and work our 12th step. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, a quick disclaimer. While we hope these episodes on the steps of recovery will be helpful to both sponsors and sponsees alike, these 12 weeks of episodes are not intended to replace the necessity of working with a sponsor through the steps. We will not be working the steps in these meetings. They are meant only to be a supplement and informative reference on what the steps mean and why they are important to the individuals speaking about them. Step 10 reads, quote, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Now let me introduce a little bit about David A., our guest speaker for today. And this is in his own words. He says, my name is David. I got sober through the big book of AA and the Back to Basics beginner meetings of Wally P. I have been sober from drugs and alcohol since October 23rd, 2013. Since then, I have entered into sex recovery, sober since July 25th of 2020. My primary S programs are PAA and SAA, but have found much support and truth in SA, as well as help from SLAA. I have also found much help in my life from ACA and OA, living in steps 10, 11, and 12, and the yardsticks of the four absolutes permit me an ever-growing and deepening relationship with a higher power who loves me unconditionally. This helps me keep me sober and teaches me to view myself and others with love, not to be confused with lack of boundaries or people-pleasing. David, we're excited to hear from you. Take it away. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for asking me to speak. I think this is a great podcast. I know we already invited God in a couple of times, but I was kind of scrambling to get here. So if you guys would humor me, if y'all would just join me in a couple of moments of silence to silently invite God in your own way. Amen. I'm just going to set a timer for 20 minutes, so I'll know I have like about 5 minutes to start wrapping up when it goes off. All right, so my name's David. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. I am a sex and porn addict. I am an adult child of an alcoholic, and the jury's out if I'm officially a food addict or not, but I sure look like one sometimes. So talking about step 10, a couple of things came into mind while I was sort of praying and meditating before this. And the first thing is it doesn't matter if I don't do a good job speaking today. the idea that if I don't do a good enough job speaking, that someone is going to suffer is a lack of faith in God. God is bigger than that. And one of the things I want to talk about is part of the spirit of the 10th step, that is growing in understanding and in effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. So my first couple of years working the steps, I really appreciated the mechanics of the part of the 10th step that says, we continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these cropped up, we asked God to remove them. We discussed them with someone immediately. We made amends if we had harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to others we could help. And my sponsor gave me an acronym, WADAT, WADAT, which was watch, ask, discuss, amends, turn. And that just kind of became an automatic part of my thinking, just to be constantly watching, be constantly in self-reflection. And when those character defects popped up, I would submit to that process. And one of my early spiritual role models, this guy who called himself Crazy Crackhead Kevin the Crackaholic, who was a CA member, who was super solution oriented and brought meetings to my rehab and really gave me a good example of what recovery looked like. He called the 10th step spiritual judo. He was like, my character defects come at me and I put them in this process. And by the end of it, I'm thinking about how I can help others. Right. But I want to talk more about this idea of growing in understanding and effectiveness. So I have been able to expand my concepts of what selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear are. I've been able to do that by so many things. And when I talk about the 10th step, I'm also going to be speaking about steps 4 through 9 and 11 and 6 and 7, because they all intertwine. So a good place to start is, let's see, I want to say about 5 years ago, I started to notice I was very judgmental of other people in AA. I came from a very solution-oriented group. We were very entrenched in the big book and the studying of the Oxford group and two-way prayer and centering prayer and all those things. And when I would hear people share in meetings things that I didn't think were solution-oriented enough, or, what I would deem middle of the road, or, watered down recovery, I would get resentful. I would get judgmental. And behind that was a fear that that I needed to correct what they were saying, because they were out there killing people. What about the real alcoholic? What about the person who needs a spiritual experience? What about the person who can't rely on human power at all? You know what I mean? And for a while, I would say I wasn't even aware of my resentments or my arrogance or my self-righteousness or my self-importance. And if I was, it was just on the cusp of my consciousness. And I want to say that for the first while, being in what I like to call the evangelical stage, or sometimes sharing in meetings what essentially was me correcting these people, like indirectly, right, really worked, honestly. It made me feel good. It made others feel good. My confidence, my charisma, it attracted people to me. I helped a lot of people. I didn't mince any words about the solution. And then at some point, I started to realize my own hypocrisy, my own self-righteousness, intolerance, my speaking down to others from a spiritual hilltop. I was so obsessed with the big book and what they were saying and how it didn't represent the big book. But what about love and tolerance of others is our code. Where was my love and tolerance of others, right? And my my sponsor says something about character defects. He talks about them like Wile E. Coyote in Looney Tunes. When Wile E. Coyote runs off the cliff and he's standing in midair, and he's standing in midair, and it's not until he looks underneath him and realizes that he's in midair that he starts falling. And that's what it's like with me and my character defects sometimes. Is I don't get any pain from them until I start to be aware that they're there, and I start to see the consequences of them, right? How that arrogance is off-putting, how it's not loving and tolerant, how it might be making others feel bad, how it might be shaming others, and in the very least, how I can see that those things are alive in me, whether or not I'm getting away with them, right? And I started doing, 4-column inventories on this, right? So I'm talking about the 10th step, and a lot of times just like doing that WAD ad is enough, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's deeper, and I have to like go back to the 4th step and start doing like house cleanings again, right? So I started doing this extended house cleaning on all these people that I resented in the rooms, and I started really digging into my 3rd column more. Now, the first couple of times I went through the steps, I was really digging into my 4th column, right? Because I had so much gross, meaning obvious, like, offensive behavior, antisocial behavior, lying, manipulating, just being mean, just not subtle stuff, and then it started to get more subtle. So I started to dig in my 3rd column more. And there's a type of 3rd column called the extended 3rd column, where I don't just say, oh, this affects my self-esteem, oh, this affects my pride, oh, this affects my ambition. I look at it from the perspective of the actor playing director and roles I'm assigning others, right? So the self-esteem is the role I assign myself, pride is the role I assign others. So like in these inventories, I saw I was assigning myself a role, the AA guru, the big book master, right? I was assigning others a role, right? That they needed to see me as that, right? That they needed to bow down and show their bellies and realize my dominance, right? I started to see my ambition, right? Which is I want to take over AA. I want to take over everybody's home group. I want to depose the elder statesmen of those groups, right? And institute myself, right? My security, right? Like I need those things in order to be okay, right? I need those things in order for you to be okay, because nobody's going to do as good a job as me, right? Personal relations, right? How I think the relationship is supposed to look, and on, right? And then I started to look behind those things because, I was also doing adult children of alcoholics at the time, which is all about, well, I don't want to say it's all about, but some concepts in it are my biological parents, my birth parents are the biological vehicle of my birth, but I have another parent, and that's a loving higher power, right? And I can think about all the people in my life who filled that parental role, right? And I can forgive my parents for not giving me unconditional love in certain circumstances because they're humans just like me, right? And my problem is I'm always looking for people for unconditional love, and I need to look to God for unconditional love, right? And then I started looking at these things, right? In my 3rd column, these ways I'm playing God and assigning roles and trying to control, right? And what was behind all of them is I get to be the hero. I get to swoop in and save whoever, right? But I know something about fear. Fear is always self-centered for me, right? So for me to stop and say my fear is that others will be hurt is not seeing the true extent of my selfishness and self-centeredness. My fear is that if I don't save you, I won't win God's favor and approval, right? And then I'll cut myself off from God with my character defects. And I know God will never abandon me, but he basically outsources his abandonment, right, to me. And then I'm subject to relapse, right? So how big is my God, right? So I started to see that, And not only did I start praying, God, please take my self-esteem, please take my pride, please take the fears behind these things, I started to involve self-parenting, which is another ACA concept into my prayer and meditation life, right? Which is saying things to myself like, I am worthy of love. I am worthy of love no matter what, And this would manifest in little ways, right? I'd be in traffic. Somebody would cut me off. I would get a resentment, right? I would be resentful at them. I would pray for the selfishness to be removed. I was no longer angry at the person, but I was beating up on myself for being selfish in the first place. And that's where the self-parenting would come in. Like, I love you even though you got angry. I love you even though you didn't work for a perfect program. I love you even though you were selfish just now, right? And that started to change my relationship with God, right? And so we're talking about expanding, understanding and effectiveness and my understanding of character defects and my understanding of selfishness, right? So what we're really looking at here is perfectionism, right? I need to do this perfectly in order to recover, stay recovered, have God love me, not harm others, be of maximum service, etc. Right? And then let's tie that into the four absolutes, right? Because we use that in two-way prayer. And one of the things we look at is, are my thoughts in the voice of fear or the voice of love, right? So you can hear all those thoughts. They're all fear-based, right? Like it's a pushy used car salesman, cutthroat lawyer trying to convince me why I need to do something, right? There's not unconditional love in that voice. So one of the things I'm doing is pausing when I talk, because part of my talking fast is feeling like I need to get it all in there, right? Like God's bigger than that, right? So then I started to bottom out with porn addiction, right? And through two-way prayer, I was guided to find a fellowship that was for that. And I found Porn Addicts Anonymous, which is an offshoot of Sex Addicts Anonymous. And I got a sponsor there, and I was suspicious of that fellowship. I was suspicious they were going to tell me, you just need to make all your amends and pray and meditate. And I was like, I do all those things. I can't stop, using porn or acting out sexually, right? And then they told me about this concept of the three circles, right? Where, I define what abstinence is for me, right? And for me, a relapse is viewing pornography in any form, right? And then I have a middle circle. And over the time, more things have gone in there, but I really can't be indulging in any type of fantasy at all. I don't want to get too explicit, but there are certain things I can do, but I have to be very careful how I do them. Obviously, I can't be indulging explicit images that are, technically non-pornographic, etc. And I did not like this concept of the circles. To me, it sounded like self-will. I'm used to being in recovery from drugs and alcohol, where if I'm recovered, I can hand you a beer, I can watch a Corona commercial on TV. I can smell weed on the street in the summertime and say, that smells good. I can't do that with sex recovery stuff, right? So I had to get humble around that stuff and set aside everything I thought I knew about recovery. And the perfectionism comes in here because I was over sponsoring. I was spreading myself too thin. I was trying too hard to be perfect. And it was basically like I could do that and the obsession for drugs and alcohol wouldn't come back. But I could not do that without needing the ease and comfort of pornography. It was like I recovered and I got to know God, but the sex crutch was still there. And if I wanted to let go of this sex crutch, I had to learn how to become more gentle with myself. So it was something that was a long time coming, this becoming more gentle and letting go of perfectionism, but it really didn't come full circle until it was like, if I don't let go of this completely, I won't be able to stay sexually sober, you know? So now that's something I look for in my spot check inventories, right? That WADAT, or even in the nightly review, which is technically part of the 11th step, but it's obviously in the spirit of self-reflection, right? Am I being a perfectionist? Am I being rigid? Am I letting that voice of fear make me try to be perfect and work too hard in my recovery, right? Now, this is advanced level stuff for me. It might not be for someone else, right? What I mean by that is my perfectionism saved my life when I first got sober. When I first got sober in AA, I had never done anything all the way through. I had never seen anything through. My perfectionism manifested back at that time in terms of, if I'm not a natural, I won't do it because I'm so afraid of not being good at something. So all of a sudden, this thing became alive in me, which was, I'm going to do the 12 steps better than anyone ever. I'm going to be the best AA ever. And like, that saved me from getting in so many different inappropriate relationships. My porn use saved me from that too. You know, I was single, I was ready to date. There were people that were interested in me. I knew that they weren't ready, that it wasn't healthy, et cetera, et cetera. Thank God I had the crutch of porn there at the time, right? But these things got to a point where they no longer served me, right? My perfectionism got to a point where it no longer served me, you know? So burning that fuel of perfectionism and fear and rigidity saved my life my first couple of years working the steps. And then all of a sudden it was like, we need to switch the fuel source, David. You know, self-reliance fails you. Self-reliance got you so far. This reliance on perfection and rigidity and fear to be a hard worker and to become disciplined, but it's not getting you far enough. There has to be a better way, trusting and relying upon infinite God, right? And that's when I had to start changing my concept organically, you know, to a more loving and gentle God. So I'm seeing I have like 6 minutes left, so I'm going to pause again. So yeah, part of the 11th step that I really think intertwines with the 10th step is this idea of pausing when agitated and doubtful, right? So the 10th step tells us to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, and when they crop up, ask for them to be removed, etc. The 11th step says pause when agitated or doubtful, right? So what is agitation? The predecessor of resentment, right? What is doubt? The predecessor of fear, right? So it lets me nip it in the bud. And I got very good at doing those things, right? But I didn't get very good at pausing. I would get feared up or selfed up, which, by the way, is a term they use around South Jersey and Philly, which I just picked up a couple of months ago, which I love, right? Feared up, selfed up. So I'd get feared up or selfed up. And I would let that fear push me into praying. God, please help me. God, please help me. God, please take my selfishness. Blah, 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 God, 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 God. I even had this thing called scientific prayer, where I would just say all the things God was to me, which I actually got from Emmett Fox, right? God is big, God is love, God is everything, God is everywhere, God is all the time, God is all knowing, God is all powerful, God is love, God is light, God is truth, God is infinite wisdom, God is mercy, God, and again and again and again. I would outrun my anxiety, be like, oh, you want to think fast? Let's go. You know what I mean? And it worked for me until it didn't. And I'd be praying and praying and praying, and I'd be panicking. I'd be like frantic, you know? And maybe I wasn't really pausing, right? So something else I've incorporated recently is mindfulness and grounding. And there's a lot of different grounding techniques you can use. One that I use is I look around the room and see 5 things I can see, and I say what they are. I see a green bandana, I see a black hat, I see a white wall. Then I get quiet and listen for 4 things I can hear. Then I see if there's 3 things I can feel, right? And focus on feeling them, right? 2 things I can smell, right? So laundry, chapstick, right? And one thing I can taste, and usually it's the last thing I ate because a lot of times I can't just, right? And that gets me grounded and in the present moment. And then I go into prayer and I do it less frantically, right? And that has helped me soften more because there's a lot of times where I've paused now and gotten more grounded and mindful and found I had something else to say, which is helpful to others right now, right? Previously, when I would get to that point, I'd be like, well, I guess there's nothing left to say. Better get off the stage, which is good, but the enemy of the best, right? I can take a moment, right? I can breathe. And that actually has helped me with my sex recovery even more because one of the, expanding my concept of selfishness, right? There are a lot of things I used to do that I didn't consider sexually selfish that now I do, not because now I consider them sexually selfish for me, not because in and of themselves they're immoral, because I know how they affect me. I know how they affect my usefulness. I know how they turn on my mental obsession, right? And one of the things I noticed was that even when being intimate with my partner, sometimes a lustful voice would turn on in my head and just start narrating what was happening. I mean, it was still present, right? It's still, but it's narrating what's happening in a lustful voice. And it got to the point where that would turn on my my sex obsession, right? And this grounding practice enables me to be in my body rather than my mind, right? Because it's a different part of your mind that's focusing on touching the water bottle, right? If you really focus on how it feels to run your finger down the side of a water bottle, I'm not in that part of my mind that narrates. So pausing, getting grounded in the present moment. And the last thing I want to say is talking about the concept of a positive inventory. So I don't do this all the time, but sometimes my inventory becomes a tool for me beating myself up because I can always find something I did wrong, something I could have done better. That question in the nightly review, what could I have done better? In some ways that saves my life because there's so many things I do that aren't harmful or selfish, but they could have been done more skillfully. But that's a double-edged sword, and that perfectionism can step in, right? So sometimes when I do those last two questions, right, was I thinking about myself or what I could do for others, what I could pack into the stream of life? I'll actually go through my day and I'll write all the positive things I did, right? This is what I did pack into the stream of life, right? This is what I did do for others. And then I can take it a step further, right? What are the attributes of a person that spends 2 hours with a sponsee? What are the attributes of a person that cleans up the house because they know it's helpful? What are the attributes of a person that had something to share in a meeting but didn't because they weren't sure if it would really harm someone or not, right? Gentleness, consideration, thoughtfulness, kindness, love, humility, right? And then I get my list of assets, right? And I can use that for self-parenting, you know? That's helped me set aside what I think I know even more. I used to scoff at gratitude lists. Where's that in the big book, right? Well, the spirit of it is all throughout the big book, and gratitude is an extremely high vibration, right? Anyways, that's it for me. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciated the way that you wove step 10 and 11. And a mutual friend of ours, a mutual recovery friend, Father Bill W., he always says, if I'm not watching, then I won't know what the hell to pray about. And that's a direct quote from him. I've got to watch to see what's going on in my life, where those character defects are rearing their ugly heads, so I can know what to pray about. And then more will be revealed. I love this concept and how you wove those things together. Thank you for your share there. Now, before we get to the Q&A portion, I want to remind our live audience that if you have questions for David, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your window there. It's two speech bubbles over the top of each other, and we'll get to those questions as we go along here. I have written a few questions, and we will get to others that come in here. But we've got one that just came in from a member of our live audience, Lila. Lila says, I'm speechless. Thank you so much, David. Everything about this talk, especially how you modeled pausing, was exactly what I needed. Grateful to you and higher power. As a fellow perfectionist and obsessive thinker who revels in being hard on myself, do you have a sense of how to differentiate between the self-reflection based in love versus self-reflection based in perfectionism or self-abuse to either feel different in your body?
Yes. The self criticism, the inner critical parent, like we call it in ACA for me, gives me a feeling of constriction in my body, being cornered, walls closing in. The voice of God gives me a feeling of expansiveness in my body, and also the feeling of unconditional love and support, like a really loving, supportive coach or parent, that when they hold me accountable, because they will be honest with me about my flaws, my shortcomings, they won't be overly permissive. The love is still there. It's not, if I don't do this, the love won't be there. The love is there no matter what, regardless of if I listen or not. And I find that this also lines up with the four absolutes, right? Selfish versus unselfish, honest versus dishonest, uh, self-seeking or resentful versus pure, and love versus fear. And when I focus in on love versus fear, I listen for the tone of voice of the thought. And when that tone of voice is that critical, threatening, bullying, I always say used car salesman, because the thing my voice of fear loves to say to me more than anything is, if you don't capitalize on this opportunity right now, you will miss out on God's will for you. Versus loving, where this is a no pressure situation. And then the last thing I want to say about that is actually a quote from the ACA book, which has really helped me. It talks about the difference between control and discernment. So this is on page 259 in chapter 7 in the big red book of Adult Children of Alcoholics. With step 10, we also realize we have released more of our control, and we are learning the difference between control and discernment. Discernment comes from inside and is the breath of God guiding us to do the right thing. We know what to do in a given situation when our breathing matches God's breathing. In comparison with control, our breathing is often unnatural and short. There is constriction in the body. We feel driven and fixed without a sense of having real choices when we operate from rigid control. We speak without thinking, and we feel embarrassed. We then punish ourselves harshly and apologize to others a lot. We hold unpurged resentments. With discernment, we refrain from saying anything off color or acting impulsively on a given situation. Discernment means we know who we are. We trust ourselves at last. We can relax and be an actor in life rather than a reactor. And in ACA, because in AA, the problem is we're the actor playing director. And in ACA, the problem is we're reacting to people because we're codependent. So that's what they mean, actor rather than reactor. And this reading really speaks to me, because often I feel in situations where I have choices, but they're not real choices. Like I have to choose something, and I don't.
Thank you, David. Love that. And thank you for sharing that reading from the Big Red Book there. We will put a link to the Big Red Book. So if anybody wants to do that, and I'll get the page number from you. What was that page number again? So I can write it down now.
Where are you? Page 259.
Okay, perfect.
in the big
All right,
red
I will
book.
get that reference so it'll be in the podcast show notes so that anybody who wants to go there can get that. Thank you so much. All right, we have a couple more questions that have come in. One from Ben in our live audience said, I felt the lightning bolt of wisdom. Wow, how you described me in working the program, the perfectionism, but yet when it comes to sex and love, it does not work. I would love if you can explain why these addictions are different. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I can explain my experience and how they're different for me, and maybe expand a little bit. So there is no innate biological drive for drug use. I have no natural heroin drive, no natural alcohol drive. So when I do the 12 steps and those things are removed and the obsession is removed, there's nothing that even could seem like a trigger, right? Could watch movies, see alcohol, smell marijuana, clean up the bathroom at work, and throw away, heroin paraphernalia, dispense medication under the proper right, to people. No temptation, nothing. But there is a natural sex drive, right? It's there. And I've perverted that, right? Not in the sense of I'm into, things that are, too kinky or too taboo. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. That's nobody's business, right? In the sense that I've twisted it, right? I've created an unhealthy relationship with my own sex drive, right? So now in sex recovery, I have to create a healthy relationship with my own sexuality, my own sex drive, my own body image, right? Everything. And for me, the steering is much more sensitive on my sex recovery, right? Like I can be spiritually sick for days, weeks, months, and never think about taking a drink or a drug, right? Like I can be on self-will and be a tornado in my life just without the drink. And it's a long time before a drink or a drug starts to sound like a good idea, right? Give me 15 minutes on self-will, right? before the sex, before things start to get, hinky with my sex recovery, right? The steering is a lot more sensitive. And I think that's why the gentleness is so important. And the humility, you know what I mean? Like, setting aside old ideas, right? Like I hate the word trigger, right? Because it's not in the big book, right? And I could go through the gymnastics of how like there actually aren't triggers in my sex addiction. As long as I'm spiritually fit, I can't be triggered, but I can get unrecovered really quickly. So then I'm in a place to be, right? So it's just like, rather than try to explain that to people, when people use that language, I just use that language with them because I mean, what are we talking about here? You know what I mean? I hope that helped.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that sharing of your experience with that. Another question came in from the live audience. This is from Lindley. Lindley says, thank you so much for your powerful share. How do we let go of the obsession of acting out when it feels so natural because it's been such a huge part of my life for so long? And I think you touched a little bit on that, but let's go a little bit deeper if you don't mind.
So something I've gotten from blending SAA and SA. SA talks about progressive victory over lust. SAA has the circles, right? So my first version of the circles permitted me to have sex with self, and permitted me to have fantasy as long as the fantasy was about like people that don't exist. I can just make up forms in my mind, right? Or if it was about me and my partner, right? And then what I found was that I couldn't control the fantasy, right? That it was like an alcoholic trying to have just one drink. You know what I mean? It would go into places that didn't fit the parameters of what was allowed, right? So then I found out about something called mindful masturbation, which is basically having sex with self while staying focused on the physical sensations in my body, and also accepting that there might not be an orgasm in this practice, right? And I used that for a while, and it was very helpful. And then I noticed that I was narrating what was happening between myself and my body in my head in a lustful voice, right? And then that lustful voice has a physical allergy to it and just starts to go places that I don't want to go, right? So through inventory and prayer and whatever, I started trying to find physical meetings for SAA. And I accidentally went to a physical meeting for SA, where they have a hard line definition of sobriety. And they had me take a look at sex with self in a way that maybe another fellowship would not have made me look at. And I looked at my relationship with sex with self and abstained from that for about 3 months, until I realized that wasn't actually healthy for me. It was an overcorrection. But now I have a much more mindful practice with sex with self, right? Where I stay in physical sensation. I don't even allow myself to go into narration. And also I do it a lot less often because there's a lot of times where I'm doing it for the wrong reasons. For me, it really has to be about, this is going to sound, I hope this doesn't sound inappropriate, but it really has to be about my body wanting me to make love to myself, not so much about needing to have an orgasm. And that is actually translated in me being able to actually make love in real life, right? Whereas even though prior with my partner, I was a very good and giving partner, I wasn't fully present because that voice was there, you know? So I say all that to say, it's been a progressive victory over lust for me. And I don't think I've won yet, but I've recovered more ground, you know? And that's why I think it's really individualized and requires a lot of gentleness. Oh, Justin, you
Yeah, sorry, I noticed I was on mute. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that will open the eyes and minds of a lot of people, myself included, about those things. Thank you for sharing that. I do have another question here that I would like to do this. You and I have had a couple of calls like this before, called a step 10 call. Do you mind kind of going through the nuts and bolts of what a step 10 call looks like and sounds like to you for the newcomer, for somebody who may be like, how the heck do I do that? What do I do in one of those?
Yeah. And thanks for asking that. That was something else I wanted to talk about, actually. Strangely enough, my step 10 buddy was my wife for years. And believe it or not, it really worked. But then when I entered sex recovery, I had to start getting fellow sex addicts to do those 10 steps with sometimes. So right now I have a 10-step buddy. And the way our calls look is we have an hour a week blocked out, and we'll pray in a way that feels organic for us. And if we really don't know what to do, I will read my nightly reviews from the week for about a half hour, and they will give me feedback. And then they will read their nightly reviews from the week for about a half hour and give me feedback. But sometimes we just check in and see where each other are. And I don't want to say too much more because it's sort of like, I feel like it's better to kind of give an outline, because so much of it becomes so individualized at that point. I don't want to like over prescribe. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And sometimes when you and I have had one of those calls, we kind of almost go through like the 4-column inventory together on that call. It's more of a prescript or a not a chronic check-in, but an acute 10-step call. What does one of those look like to you?
Oh yeah, thank you. So like when somebody calls me with like a resentment or a fear, usually I'll go right into the 4 column with it. And so like with a resentment, I'll be like, okay, column 1, you're resentful at so and so. Column 2, the cause. What is the cause of it? And you know, 101 instructions is keep it sweet and short, right? But sometimes I'll actually really hear a person out. Then it's okay, let's get into your 3rd column. And I ask them those mechanical questions of, does it affect your self-esteem, your pride, your ambition, your security? And depending on where they're at, I might just keep it simple like that, or I might dig into like a real deep 3rd column and ask them questions to help them see, because it's hard to see your self-esteem, right? What's the role I assign myself? Usually it starts with, how did that make you feel? Oh, well, it made me feel dumb. Okay, how would you like to feel? I would like to feel smart. Okay, so the role you've assigned yourself is, I am smart. And then when somebody treats you a way that feels like you're not smart, it threatens, interferes, hurts that role, right? We'll dig into that. Sometimes I won't get into the 3rd column at all. I'll go right into the 4th column, right? Where, I'll do things in the 4th column. Like there's something called the realization, like in the big book. And this is all from Big Book Awakening, by the way. It says, we realized the people who harmed us were perhaps spiritually sick. So the question I'll ask is, have you ever, so I'd be like, think about what this person did to you, right? Have you ever done that to them or anyone ever? And eventually they'll end up seeing, oh yeah, like maybe I didn't do exactly this, but like I felt slighted, I felt insulted, right? I've done things like that to others. And then I'll dig in, I'll be like, when you did that, did you think you were right? And they'll be like, yeah, I thought I was right, or they'll be like, no, I didn't think I was right. And I'll be like, oh, so you thought you were wrong, but you did it anyways. Why? And they'll be like, well, because I thought maybe I was kind of right, or I thought maybe it was the lesser of 2 evils, or I just couldn't stop myself. And I'm like, okay, so no matter what your answer is, that's spiritually sick, right? I had no idea it was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. I knew it was wrong, but I believed my delusion, right? That's powerlessness, right? So then can I have the same compassion for the person that wronged me that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend? Like, do I deserve shame for my powerlessness, or do I deserve compassion and empathy and understanding in order for me to heal? And then they can do that sick man prayer. And then we'll dig into the 4 column, right? Self-seeking. You can break it down different ways, right? Self-seeking can be selfish actions, right? So like all the bad things you did, right? Like I lied, I manipulated, I gossiped, I was passive aggressive, I was threatening, I was intimidating, maybe it's facial expressions, maybe it's tone of voice, right? And usually there's something there, but sometimes, very rarely, we haven't done anything physically, right? But then we get into selfish attitudes and thinking, right? Selfish intentions, selfish thoughts. I wanted to hurt, I wanted to punish, I wanted to make myself look good, I wanted to relax, I wanted a break, I wanted to not deal with it, right? I wanted them to go away, right? I want, me, right? But then we can also look at selfishness in different ways, right? Self-pity, self-centeredness, self-righteousness, etc. We can dig into dishonesty, right? Dishonesty can be lying by omission. But sometimes it's okay to leave things out, right? Depends on the context. It can be hypocrisy, right? But even when there isn't that there's always delusion, right? There's delusional thinking underneath selfish actions, right? What lie did I believe that justified my selfish thinking? And you can get it in the 3rd step in the big book. It says, were we not self-seekers even when trying to be kind? Are we not the victim of delusions that we can wrest happiness and satisfaction out of this world if we only manage well? So that means that every time I've done something selfish, I believed a lie, one of 2 lies. Either once I get this, it will make me happy, right? Or my behavior will work, right? There have been times I've been pushy because I wanted to spend money. You know what I mean? I believed that once I spent that money, I would feel good and fulfilled and have the new shoes that made me feel like I'm in a music video, right? I also thought that being pushy and kind of edgy and kind of whatever would work, and people would be like, oh, let's go shopping, instead of me creating tension, right? And then we'll dig into the fears behind that. And then me jump into the fear inventory and then let room for another question, right? So the fear inventory I'll dig in mostly is, what is the fear? State it. Why do I have the fear? No wrong answer for that. Just why ever you think you have the fear. Did I set the ball rolling, which basically, is it my fault, right? Like, am I afraid of getting caught in a lie because I lied? In which case I set the ball rolling, right? Or did I just walk into a room and I'm crazy insecure? Maybe I'm just an insecure person. Maybe I didn't set the ball rolling, right? Then how is self-reliance failing me? And I break that down into other questions, right? What are all the ways you've tried to deal with this problem? List them all. Even if it's praying, even if it's meditating, even if it's doing inventory, even if it's avoiding it, even if it's sponsoring people, right? All the things you've tried to do to manage this fear. Next question, did it work? Or is the fear still there, right? Next question, what are the unintended consequences, right? So for me, a lot of times I worry. Did it work? No, the fear is still there. What are the unintended consequences? I'm burning up energy worrying, right? So then how would God have me be? And then that's where, getting quiet and listening to God comes in, and, all the stuff we talked about for discerning the voice of God. There's other stuff too, but yeah.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for taking that time and digging into that. I'm going to be re-listening and making some more notes on this, because very helpful. I really appreciate it. David, thank you so much. That was a great RICO 12. Oh, you know what? Before I do the closing reading, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us?
I think somebody asked if I'd be willing to share my number.
Yeah. What we can do there is I will have I'll give the email address. They can email me, and then I can put them in contact with you that way. That way your number and contact information isn't out there for anybody in the world to get at any time.
Okay, cool. Well, you can totally do that. So yeah, like my closing, my last closing thought is, I want to talk about centering prayer, and I want to talk about the idea of 2 sits of meditation throughout the day, right? So something that's become like standard every day for me now is not only my morning prayer and meditation, but a second meditation sometime, usually between the hours of like 2 p.m. and like 7 p.m., where and you can do whatever type of meditation you want. I usually do like mindfulness or centering prayer, because people say prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening. But sometimes if I just meditate for stillness, where I'm silent and God is silent, and we just share the space, it allows time for the divine surgeon to work on me in ways I do not understand, right? And all this stuff I spoke about today is very good, but I honestly think that second sit is just as important for me. And having that second sit there is so intertwined with me having the ability and the discipline and the willingness and just all of the attributes that I've needed to have these other things in my life. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Love that line on the divine surgeon working on me in ways I don't understand. Awesome. Thanks again, David. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If you have any other questions, or like mentioned here, if you'd like to get in contact with David, please send me an email at rico12pod@gmail.com. That's RECO12POD @gmail.com. And I can facilitate getting you in contact with David. And if you'd like to join in our community, go to rico12.com/forum and join in any conversation that may happen there with questions that may come up. I invite you to come back next week. And if you have not yet rated and reviewed the podcast, please go do so now. It's a great way to work our 12th step and sharing this message with others. Next week, we will be covering step 11 with Nikki M. She's excited to share about her recovery and living the principle of step 11. I'm sure it will be a fantastic meeting, and I look forward to seeing you all back here at that point. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the Thomas Merton prayer that David will say. Go ahead, David.
My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore will I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Amen.
Thank you. Keep coming back, everybody. Come trudge this happy road with me. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of